All right, we're live. I think everybody's doing okay. I don't know if you can see it on my face, but I've been really ill in the past few days. So hopefully this will go okay. I might have to sneeze or I might sniffle a little bit during this, but a few days ago I just slept all day. I was so horribly ill. All right. So a few announcements before we start. First of all, I want to really thank the people that are running the Clips channel. I think everybody has to check it out. It's pretty amazing. They've been putting out a video every day, I think, and just trying to get little nuggets out of my videos. It's been great. They're going to put up a Christmas list, a Christmas playlist. I think it's coming out on December 20th, and trying to pull out different things that I've said about Christmas during the year. So check that out. Don't forget to subscribe to the Clips channel. I think they have a lot in store for us in the next few months. So yeah, a few things that are pretty sure now are going to happen. I am definitely going to be in Seattle in May. I'll be giving a carving workshop and also a conference. So I'm going to be there for like a whole week. I'm also going to be near Boston in June, giving another carving workshop and probably giving some talks. I will be in Saskatoon in January, mid-January, giving also a carving workshop, but I think that carving workshop is closed. But I'll also be giving one or two talks during that week. So stay tuned. I will post the dates and the places either on the videos or check out my website. As I get the final details, I will always post the events there. So that's been going on. So let's go. Let's just start because there are a lot of questions. I think that I want to warn everybody that I might, if I see that people are posting several questions, I might just take one of your questions because now there are just too many questions coming on. So I would suggest that people try to really get one question in a month for the people who put their questions in advance. We'll see. I'll try to do what I can. I'll try to answer all the questions, but I'm not sure I'll be able to answer all the questions. Oh, I have a question. Are there any of the moderators in the chat? I see that Jonathan Pajot Clips is in the chat. Who's in the chat? Is Christian Chad there? I know that Jacob is not there. Vivek Varna Sirandi says, I'm a deputy moderator. Do I know you, Vivek? I'm not sure I know you. Let's see. I need a moderator if I have no moderator, or else it's just going to get bad. Who's there that I know in the chat? Is there anybody that I know? I'm going to put whoever it is that's coming here as my Clips channel. If it's Lisa or if it's Pete, I'm adding you as a moderator. Hopefully it's somebody I know. Lisa's there. I'm putting you as a moderator anyways, Lisa, just in case. All right, hopefully that'll be good enough. If not, it's gonna get nuts there. It's gonna get nuts in the moderator. We'll see. Anyways, whatever. All right, let's go. Let's just do this. And if I see Lisa says, how does one moderate? I don't know, Lisa. I've never done it myself. I've just always added other people as moderators. All right, let's just go. Let's do this. And if we get crazy people trying to fill the chat with nonsense, I'll just name random moderators. Hopefully that they'll do okay. All right, here we go. Okay, so I'm starting with my website. As you know, people who give at $10 or more, they have a chance to ask questions in advance. And so I'm going to go from my website to Subscribestar and finally to Patreon. All right, here we go. So David Flores asks, is aristocracy, kings, queens, etc., another marginal figure, The thought occurred to me when listening to you and Benjamin Boyce talk about elites having trouble relating to common people. No, I don't think that you have to understand them as marginal figures. The one thing you do have to understand that there's a relationship between the summit of something and the margin. There's a relationship between the beginning and the end, and actually they're not the same. They're opposites. And so there's a relationship between the king and the pauper. You see that in stories, you know, the idea that the king and the pauper trade place. You see it in stories where the prince will marry a peasant girl. You see this idea that there is somehow a relationship between the lowest and the highest, and it has to do with the flip that happens at the lowest point and then flips. It also has to do with the kind of mirror reflection between the lowest and the highest. But it's important to understand that no, in a way, they're opposites. Like the aristocracy is similar to the margin in its what it looks like, because usually the aristocracy is a mixture. You know, the kings will marry foreign queens, the queens will marry foreign kings in order to create alliances. And so the kings, what happens in the aristocracy is that they actually are not the same as the people. They're kind of like a mix of different aristocracies. And so in that way, just like the margin, the aristocracy has a kind of weird mixture, but it's in a way the opposite of mixture, because it's the joining together of different things into a point where they can be in communion, rather than the place where there's a kind of dispersion and a kind of fragmentation on the edge. So in a way they're opposites, but in a way one can kind of become the other in certain terms. And ultimately that is why Christ relates them together and said that he is the beginning and the end. He's the Alpha and the Omega, that somehow he is able to join the two extremes, you would say, together. So I hope that makes sense. All right. But you can see it. There's a lot of symbolism like that. René Guénon famously pointed out that there's some interesting etymological relationship between things like, in English, for example, like the idea of a cap and a cape, that it actually comes from the same symbolism, that there's a relationship between horns in terms of even fingernails and a crown of a king. I've kind of talked about this strange symbolism of the extreme in some of my videos, but that's as close as it's going to get. But it's important, even though there are analogies and there are ways in which they kind of mirror each other, it's important to not confuse them. And that's the problem sometimes, is that people will confuse the beginning and the end. The beginning and the end are not the same. They're diametrical opposites. One can flip into the other, but they're not the same. And it's important to see the difference. I hope that makes sense. All right, here we go. So Massasar asks, hello, I am trying to better understand Earth in the context of the non-dualistic view of the Orthodox Church, while rejecting both the hard materialist viewpoint and nihilistic illusion in Maya. In an essay on mysticism in the Eastern Church, Nikolai Velimirovich says the nature is a symbol of truth, that the physical universe is the visible parable of the spiritual world. The first is a symbol, the second is spirit and reality. As far as I understand, the earth is the means or letter of how spirit or meaning is made manifest, similar to how markings make up a letter that combine into words to convey meaning. Yeah, the letter is real and necessary, but only as a reflection in how it conveys meaning. But what is the importance of the letter after the meaning has been conveyed? I'm not sure what your question is, bro. Okay. Markings without organization and agreement are meaningless, but it seems arbitrary. On the human level, it may be arbitrary, but the physical universe does not seem arbitrary. It has been organized as a reflection of true reality. But in the end, we're given a new body with a new heaven and new earth. Does this mean there will be new meaning or a new reality that is more true than this one, or one that is better than true? How do we not reject this body and physical reality for the better cosmos to come? Thanks for everything you do and for helping me put me on the Orthodox path. All right. So I think your question kind of boils down to the problem of, on the one hand, realizing that we have this body of death, that we live in a world of fragmentation, of decomposition, the idea of the world of the fall. But at the same time, we also have the sense that everything has to necessarily somehow contain a spark of the divine in order for it to exist. So how do we reconcile those two things together? And so this image, as you said, of the new body, of the transformed body, the transfigured body, is the way that in imagistic terms is given in the church. The idea that we are resurrected in Christ, that we can participate in the resurrection now, and also in the eschaton and the ultimate moment when everything comes together. But the way to kind of understand it is to understand that the problem is not the problem. The thing that makes everything look dark and decomposed, and the way that we participate it is in its kind of decomposed, fragmented way or arbitrary way is because we are not looking in the right direction. The sense that you get in the mystics and the sense that you get in the fathers is that if you actually detach yourself from physical reality, from your physical body, let's say, then you will ultimately discover that it is participating in the glory of God, right? And so asceticism is not so much seeing that the world is evil, but it is trying to remove your passions from all those things, trying to not be attached to all these things around us in a disordered way, so that they will actually appear ultimately as full of life and glowing. And so that seems to me, at least when I read St. Maximus, that seems to me to be what I see, is that we need to be able to remove ourselves for a certain time, or to a certain amount from, let's say, this kind of fallen, broken world, not because it's evil in itself, but because as we remove ourselves from it and we stop being attached to it passionately, then we can start to see the divine sparks that are hidden. We can start to see the world shine, and then it'll appear to us full of glory. All right. So Belize 1234 asks, okay, I've been reading Brave New World recently, and in the book they mentioned cutting the top of crosses to make the letter T. I know you have talked about the horizontal and vertical coming together to make a cross. The horizontal does not meet the vertical exactly in the middle, like a plus sign, and it is not all the way to the top like a T. It is in between those places. I wanted to ask you what you thought the part above the horizontal represented. From my understanding, I believe that it is the part of the cross reserved to God. That is where the head would be if you are crucified, and in the Christian tradition, Christ is the head with the church of his body. Thank you for your insight and for helping me understand more than I thought was possible. This was just something I thought was interesting. So the way to understand the cross is to understand the vertical as the hierarchy itself. And so the hierarchy itself is, you on the one hand, you could call it heaven, let's say, but on the one hand, you could really understand it as the different levels of this ontological hierarchy. And the bar of the cross represents the earth. So the earth in the sense of a level of the hierarchy. So each aspect of the world, there's a jump between each aspect of the world, right? From your parts to your self, from ourselves to a nation, let's say, from the nation, or the best way to understand is from our gathering together into the body of Christ, to the head of Christ. So it's like every level you could understand as these levels of the cross. And so let's say if you take the 3-barred cross, for example, in the Orthodox faith, you can understand it as the 3 bars as heaven, earth, and let's say the underworld or the world of death. So you can have, so when you have 1 bar, it's usually just represents the notion of that level in the hierarchy. But the vertical, the axis itself, is just the actual string that holds everything together. The let's say the procession of logi, the procession of essences that are layered on top of each other, and descend from heaven down to the bottom of the world. I hope that makes sense. I feel like maybe I'm speaking too abstractly, but I struggle to find another way to explain it. And so the idea of cutting the top of the cross, if you wanted to make a cross that was just a T, would be that you don't have the top part of the hierarchy. You just have the earth and what is below. And so you kind of descend into potentiality, right? And you don't have access to the higher levels of being, to the principalities which are above us. And so it's a kind of a T. You could see it as a kind of materialistic vision of reality. And you could see it as, like, in terms of Brave New World, you could understand it as this idea of, let's say, pleasure, right? So it's like all the world of pleasure and all the world of the passions are what are underneath. And so you have the world, and then everything down is what they're attached to in Brave New World. All right, so Gabriel Milati says, "Hi, Jonathan. Could you say something about the symbolism of classical versus Baroque?" Thank you. Well, classical and Baroque are really just two poles of modernism. They're two poles of the Enlightenment, and they're just like a bouncing off of each other. And so, in a way, if you look at traditional medieval Christian architecture, there's a kind of desire to create symmetry, but it's not absolute symmetry. And that's something that sometimes people don't totally realize, is that, let's say, in a church, there's the basic pattern of the cross and square, or the dome on the square, and or the dome on a cross, but you never get a church that's just that. There's the pattern, and then there's a desire to create variation. So there's a kind of joining of a hierarchy which is kind of hidden inside, and then there is a freedom or a capacity to improvise and to create variation. And so the Christian art is traditional Christian art, in terms of Byzantine art or medieval art, even up to the Gothic, is always a play, a kind of balance between those two. Now, what happens in classical art is you have a pull towards this iron fist of order, right? This capacity to organize things extremely powerfully. So you have hypersymmetries and extremely centered buildings that are so symmetric that they almost feel dead. And then the Baroque goes in the other direction and creates a kind of an opening up of improvisation to a level that it's not. I mean, there's levels, right? It's like, I like Bach, I'm fine with Bach, but if you imagine that Bach leads, something in Bach in terms of breaking symmetry and in terms of playing with symmetry, creating disorder, will lead you to Beethoven, let's say. It's like you can see that those two things are kind of pulling against each other. And so then you have classicism and Baroque, and then you have neoclassicism and romanticism, and you can see the same pattern repeating itself. Then you see in modern art, you have formalism and abstract expressionism, and they're kind of pulling on each other. You have conceptual art and then you have something like surrealism, and you have these poles that are getting stronger and stronger in terms of two extremes. And so that's what I think about that. All right. So Josh the Mover asks, "Hello, Jonathan. Can you comment on Jesus uttering the phrase, 'Oh Father, why have you forsaken me?' as he took his final breath? I always found this scene deeply unsettling. My first reaction when I thought about it was that because Jesus said it, believers in him can no longer say it with any authority. Before Christ, I'm sure many people felt as though God had forsaken them from time to time. But when Jesus came, knowing what he had to do, and because we humans are the ones who killed him, it now stands that anyone who believes in Christ's teaching cannot truly say that God has forsaken them anymore." It seems like some kind of grand flip. Obviously, this is very complex, but I'm totally in the weeds, or am I onto something here? Thank you. I'll have to be totally honest with you. I have never been satisfied with any of the answers that I have read to that question. And for all my love of the church fathers, and for all my love of the I have felt like that phrase in scripture should just remain in silence, that you can't understand that phrase, because it seems like it is the ultimate aporia. It seems like it really is the notion of the logos emptying itself to its, I don't know. I don't even know how to say it. I don't know how to say it. All I can say is that I am very grateful that that mystery is there in scripture. I think it's there to help us to know that we don't understand everything, and that the relationship between the infinite being and non-being, all of these things are something that we can't fully grasp. And I think that when Christ utters those words, he is uttering one of the most profound and disturbing and difficult to understand mysteries that have ever been uttered. So, and it's tough for me when you guys ask me to explain to you some of the things that Jesus does, because some of the things that Jesus does are like, they're beyond meaning. They're creating the world. And so yeah, that's all I can say about that. But you can find the traditional answer. You can find, usually the traditional answer will read something like that it was in a way the human nature of Christ which was expressing itself. That kind of stuff, you see that in the fathers, you see that kind of language. But I find that it doesn't satisfy our disturbance before that statement. So that's as much as I'm going to give you there. All right. So SLS 94 asks, Dear Jonathan, while reading Genesis, I encountered a passage that has puzzled me. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to happen. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts about the symbolism of Genesis 31, where Rachel steals her father's idols, hides them under a camel's saddle, and seems to be cursed by Jacob. Is there a connection with Rachel's death in Genesis 35? Wow. So you guys are all going to force me to talk about the symbolism of menstruation, I guess, is what you guys are going to force me to talk about, which is not something that I intended to talk about, at least not anytime soon. That's what it has to do with. It has to do with the symbolism of menstruation. A lot of stuff that I tell you guys, I say them. I don't necessarily give you all the references to where I get the things that I get, because some of the symbolism is disturbing. And so there's no point in dwelling on that kind of stuff. But when I talk about how the ancient gods become like demons and they become like residue from an ancient civilization, or residues of something which is failed or failing, right? So you can imagine that Christianity replaces Rome, and the old pagan Rome is fallen. It's in a fallen state, and the old gods are demons, and they are idols, right? And that is related to, that's what the symbolism of menstruation is about. It has to do with the idea of a failed union of heaven and earth. And so it's a right. So I need to explain, when Rachel takes the idols and puts them under her seat, and then they I remember what it is. They want her to come and talk to, I think it's like her brother wants to come see him. And she says, I can't come to you because I'm in my women's ways. And so you can imagine, she said she's having her period and the idols are under her seat. And so the idols are stand-in for for menstruation. That is a failed union of heaven and earth, a residue of an ancient world. She's not willing to leave the ancient world behind. She's not willing to, she's supposed to be leaving her brother and joining in marriage with leaving her father, sorry, not her brother, leaving her father and joining in marriage with Jacob, but she wants to take that world with her, but she has to leave it behind. It's no longer her world. It's no longer the world in which there's life. She has to leave it behind, just like you can imagine menstruation as the preparing of a body for the child, and then there's no seed which comes to make that body come together. No logos comes to that body in order to make it whole, to make it something. And so it falls apart and it disintegrates. And you have to let that go. You have to get rid of it because it's actually dangerous. It has infernal powers. It has demonic powers because it's these fragmented pieces of things that aren't held together. And so that's what the old idols always are. That's what the old gods always end up being these fragmented, crazy demons that don't fit in the world anymore. And so that's what that story is talking about, that she had to leave that behind because it was no longer her body. It was no longer the body that she was creating with her husband, but she didn't. And so the gods, menstruation, her not willing, and her taking her father's gods, not leaving them behind, all of that goes together. So yeah. So I hope that makes sense. Sorry if anybody of you are having dinner or something, but you guys forced my arm on that one. All right. So DS Brew asks, Merry Christmas, Jonathan. You mentioned that Christianity is playing out its own narrative. Can you lay this out a bit for us? How do you view the church east-west split and subsequent fragmenting according to this idea? When I say that Christianity is playing its own narratives, that I believe that Christianity, the story of Christ, is happening at a global scale, that there are cycles of the story of Christ, you could say. And so you can see that there's the story of Christ, and then there's the story of the church before Rome, which is like a cycle, and then you have the church kind of filling up the world, and then it's like a third cycle. So it's different cycles of the same story at different levels. And I think that the church is also going through the story of itself. And so when you see when you understand it that way, then you understand it's not surprising that atheism would come out of Christianity, that Christianity would give birth to atheism, and that atheism would then betray Christianity, and then Christianity would die, or at least go down into the pit, and also go to the outside, move to the outside. It's like people don't see that that's happening. So the Christ was a Jew, and he came for the Jews, and then the Jews didn't accept him, and so that went to the Gentiles, and Rome accepted him, which were the enemies of the Jews. And then Rome converts to Christianity, and then Christians evangelize the world, and the world doesn't really want much, doesn't necessarily want that much to do with Christianity. And then the Europeans start to negate Christianity, start to refuse Christianity and betray Christianity. And then all of a sudden you have, millions and millions of Christians, more Christians in Africa, in Korea, South Korea, in China now, all over the world, in South America. So, and so it's like Christianity, as it dies where its origin, it feeds the next level and is growing and growing and growing. And that is playing itself out in a way that I think is going to cause a massive resurrection. I mean, that's what the Bible says. I can't totally tell you how it's going to happen, but it seems like that's the story that the Bible talks about. And if you look at how history has kind of played itself out, it seems to be what happened. So let's see how it does play itself out. All right, so I'm done with the Symbolic World questions. I'm going to go into Subscribe Star. All right, so Subscribe Star, here we go. Nicola asks, Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson will talk about integrating the shadow. Is there a place for this concept in Orthodox Christianity? The best I could come up with is that we should be aware of our own sinful desires so we could do something about it. Yeah, I agree. I don't totally agree with this idea of integrating the shadow in the way that Jung talks about it. I don't totally see. I think it's a problem because the idea that the shadow is something, or that darkness is something, or that somehow these dark desires that you have, that they have an essence or that they have a body. I think that that's definitely not a Christian vision. The Christian vision is that the dark side, your dark side, obviously you have it, it's there, and you have that in you. You shouldn't deny it. In that sense, you should integrate your shadow, in the sense that if you pretend that you don't have that, you're in trouble. You have all these passions. The Christian answer is to glorify them, is to flip them, to turn them and have them facing up, so that they manifest the honorable version of themselves. And so the closest, as you said, to the idea of integrating the shadow is to be humble and to see yourself as to see and not deny all your darkness, and to let's say be willing to live up to, not to fess up to it, and to not pretend that you're better than other people, but to be able to see how dark you are, not in order to integrate it in the sense of, not in the sense of as if it's something that you have to join with yourself in order to become more, but rather that you have to be able to be fully aware of yourself and know yourself, so that you can transform those dark desires into something powerful and useful. So maybe that's what Jung means. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be what Jung means, but and so the idea is, all your passions are good. Ultimately, you just have to know how to transform them through the grace of God, of course. Sorry, guys, I'm sniveling into the mic here. It's kind of disgusting. All right, so Charles Kincaid says, I was reading Dionysius's The Divine Names, that the beautiful is the same as the good, for everything looks to be to the beautiful, and the good as the cause of being. And that is the cause of harmony and splendor in all things. Do you think you could elaborate on that? I've been thinking a lot about the nature of beauty and the scourge of ugliness we find in modernity, but I'm having difficulty convincing people that it isn't merely a matter of taste or vanity. Yes. I mean, I totally agree, of course. And you probably heard, Orthodox people say beauty will save the world. It's almost become a cliche that doesn't seem to mean anything anymore, but you have to understand it in the right way. You have to understand it in the sense that the beauty, if we have to understand good as quality. We have to understand good as, and so if we only understand good in terms of morality, we're missing out on an aspect of the good, in the sense of in the sense of a high quality of something. And so, a good, a good microphone isn't a moral question, right? It's a highest quality of the purpose, of the essence of the microphone. It's the highest manifestation of the essence of something. And so the good in that sense, the good of the world is that the highest version, the highest quality of the manifestation of something. And so that's why beauty is related to that, right? Beauty is also a perception of of quality, of a harmony in things, of a, you know, of this manifestation of, you know, the because you can have music, let's say, but the beauty in the music is the capacity for these things to truly come together in this kind of powerful dance. And so I totally understand it. Sometimes I think some of the Platonists would say things like that beauty is the expression of the good, something like that. But Dionysus always is just bringing things to the radical. Like, you know, when I said recently, I said that in a talk, a lot of people notice when I said that Christianity, the expression of the infinite is equal to the infinite. You know, it's like, this is Dionysus saying that kind of stuff. It's like the beautiful is the same as the good, right? The expression of the good in the world is the same. It's like when you have that perception of beauty, then it's the same as the good. And obviously, it's not, the idea that beauty is relative is just pure nonsense. It's not relative. And the way that you can help people understand it is that there's a there are different desires that we now confuse with beauty, and one is a kind of titillation of the senses, and so that is not beauty. There's a kind of titillation of the senses that is trying to grasp at your desire, your irascible nature, you know, your desire to see novelty. And so we've actually kind of confused a sense or a perception of beauty with a kind of desire to see new things and to be titillated by new things. And so that is one of the reasons why a lot of people are confused in beauty, because they see this new fashion and they think, well, this fashion is going to come and it's going to go. And so that's the proof that beauty is vanity. But it's not, because you could say that beauty always does tend to transcend, like, and so there is a relative aspect to it, but it's pointing towards something. So when we have the experience of beauty, we can see that in the thing that we're looking at, let's say a beautiful church or a beautiful painting, we have this sense that there's a relationship between my experience of looking at this beautiful painting and looking at this beautiful church. There's something that's bringing it together, and that is what is kind of leading you upwards and kind of leading you up beyond, you know, the body of what you're looking at, you know, and not to deny the body of it, but it's kind of leading you up. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that one of the arguments against the idea that tastes or that beauty is relative and that it's all vanity or whatever is the fact that when people started to believe that in the modern age is when ugliness started to abound, and ugliness that pretty much everybody recognizes, you know, the ugliness of the suburban you know, the suburban road, there's few streets here in Quebec and Laval, you know, it's like, you know, these horrible streets with all the wires, and then all these different buildings they still have these lighted signs, and, you know, it's all absolute chaos, and the gas station and this and that. It's like, that is just, nobody thinks that's beautiful. There's just nobody who thinks that's beautiful. And the only people who think that's beautiful do it out of a very concrete sense of irony, you know, whether it's someone like Andy Warhol and that type. They know that they're participating in irony by engaging those things with an like you would engage things of beauty. So anyways, sorry, that's as much as I'm going to say about that. All right, so Craig Hinrichs asks, Am I understanding the connection between the womb and the tomb correctly? They both represent potentiality, possibility, correct? Yes. The womb is where you unite the egg and the seed, legacy and flesh. The tomb is where you unite the son with the father, saving the father from the underworld, and legacy of wisdom, or better put, the union and upgrade of the old with the new. I don't know. The whole, man, you guys pushing me in directions. I really would be, we really have to be careful not to limit the symbolism of the tomb to this story that Jordan Peterson tells about saving the father from the underworld. I have no problem with the saving of the father from the underworld. I think it's fine. It's there in Christianity as well, by the way. In the resurrection, in the resurrection story, not it in the, we don't see it in the Bible, but very soon after that, the tradition that Christ saved Adam out of Hades, it's exactly that. It's exactly saving your father from the underworld. But I think that both of those are very much the same. So you say, like you talk about the idea, unite the egg and the seed, all right? And so the seed has to die. Just like it says in scripture, the seed has to die before it gives a new body, right? And so the seed has to stop being what it's from, right? And that's how you have to understand the idea of dying, right? And so in order for there to be a new child, the seed has to stop being the father, right? It has to not just be the father. It has to be something else. It has to die from what it was. And then that is what creates this union of heaven and earth, potentiality. And so the idea of the tomb is the same. It's the same thing. At least in terms of at least in terms of Christian thinking, is that when you die and we put you in the tomb, then this is also the seed. It's sowing for a resurrection. It's sowing for a new life. Now what exactly does that mean in terms of how it's going to play out? It's like, I can't understand that. I'm here, right? I don't, just like I can't know what it was to be a sperm in my father's body. Like I can't, to be my father, I can't know that, right? And so I can't also know what the next step is. So the idea that the womb and the tomb are the place where something stops to be what it was and becomes something new. Does that make sense? Like, I hope that makes sense. And so both of them are really the same. Now in the story of of uniting the son with the father, in the sense of going into the underworld to find your father, you can kind of see it. It's interesting because you can kind of see it as, it's kind of like the reverse of because, okay, oh man, this is tough because this is difficult. And I'm realizing how much this is complicated, because the story of the hero that goes into to save his father in the underworld, or to encounter his father in the underworld, it's not the same father as let's say the Heavenly Father. And that's super important because I think that's one of the things that Jordan gets wrong. It's the dead Father. And the dead Father is not the same as the living Father. The dead Father has sunken into potentiality. He's become in a way an image also of the womb in a way, because he's just these fragmented bits that you have to go in and try to unite together in order to make a new body out of. And so, but it's not the same as your living Father. And so the idea that God the Father represents the same Father as the idea of the son that goes into the womb that goes into the tomb to save his father is just doesn't make any sense. It's not that at all. Christ does not go into Hades to save God the Father. That doesn't make sense. God the Father also doesn't represent the past in that sense, in the sense of the dead father. God the Father does not at all represent that. Adam represents that in the story of Christ. Adam represents the dead father, right? But the dead father is this broken down potentiality too, and so is the same kind of symbolism as the womb or the tomb. I hope this makes sense. It's like, in a way, I should probably make a video about this because I've been kind of thinking about this for a while, and I've been thinking that I should probably help clarify that problem, in terms of this idea of going into the underworld to save your father. So anyways, I hope that wasn't too convoluted. So Craig, because I like you, we had a really good conversation the other day. What I'll do is I'll try to get my thoughts in line properly, and I will try to put out a video explicitly on the question of the relationship between the womb and the tomb, the father, the dead father, and the living father, and to be able to differentiate the two. So we'll do that. All right. So thanks for your question, man. All right. So Christian Chad, who I think is not there in the chat, and makes me very sad to know that Christian is not there in the chat. It's like we don't have our epic man here. All right, so here we go. His question: I've been seeing a resurgence of interest in H.P. Lovecraft, especially on YouTube. There's something about the Cthulhu mythos that I've been seeing in right-wing circles online, which I don't understand. One interesting video I found was labeled "Horror is Reactionary." Any comment on this? And do you think the horror genre is symbolically reactionary? Yeah, I agree. I agree that horror movies are secretly conservative. And I think that's not that weird to say that. They're kind of secretly conservative because horror movies, they disguise this kind of horror, this desire to see horror and in a kind of extreme, sometimes a lot of sexuality and a lot of that. It's there as well. I don't suggest people watch horror movies, but usually most of the stories have a kind of divine punishment aspect to it, and they play with that. Like, people have noticed that obviously in the Scream movies, they tried to kind of deconstruct that narrative, the idea that and I think also in what was it, that recent horror movie, the one that was done by, was it The House in the Woods or something like that? I forget what it's called. Anyways, where they try to deconstruct this story, the idea that in fact, usually horror movies have a kind of fall punishment redemption arc in them, where whatever is happening to the characters in the movie are a result of some sin that has been done, and it's kind of like the revenge of the world on them, and somehow, in order to get out of it, it has to be done by some pure character or some act of reconciliation. And so yeah, I think that's true. I think that there definitely is something in there. I don't know a lot about Lovecraft. I was never really interested that much in his work, so I know a little bit about it, but I haven't read I've only read like short things of his. All right, so XRD says, in one of your videos from about a year ago, you were doing a walkthrough of an icon and used the term divine darkness. It's a term that gets my mind burning anytime I remember it. It feels like it might be something that requires a deep dive, but could you elaborate on it some here? So the image of divine darkness, usually the image of divine darkness is also related to it's usually presented as an aporia. They call it sometimes blinding light, in the sense that light so bright that you become blind, that you can't see anymore. So it's like light and dark at the same time. So the idea is, it is the aspect of God that we cannot grasp. It is the aspect which is beyond knowledge, which is beyond understanding. It's the idea of God as beyond being. And if you've watched a few of my videos, you'll see that I often explain that God is beyond it. There's an apophatic move in Orthodox theology, which is to always understand that whatever we say about God is always lacking. It never reaches to an actual description of God. It always falls short, because God is always beyond everything. And so that ends up taking on the image of darkness, because you can imagine it's always beyond whatever the light can show. And so usually we refer to God's essence in that sense as being this divine darkness. But if you read in St. Gregory of Nyssa, he sees that in the divine darkness is the mystery of the incarnation itself, because he talks about that in the divine darkness, Moses sees the tabernacle, which is Christ himself. So the tabernacle becomes something which is kind of like even beyond the divine darkness, because it is the union of infinite, the unsayable, the non-dual aspect and duality, right? And actual manifestation. It's like, the ultimate blow your mind thing, where it's both unlimited and limited at the same time. And I was reading recently too. We were talking about Dionysius. I was recently reading some of his statements. Man, he has no limit. He talks about God as being. He says God is beyond all name, beyond being, and then he goes beyond the infinite. And I'm like, dude, you're really pushing it that high, It's like, and beyond, even I think it even says beyond non-being, and it's like just any category, even non-category, he keeps saying is beyond that. So, all right, guys. So I'm going now to Patreon, dude. We already been going for an hour, and we got a lot of questions to go. I need to not be as all right. Okay, so John Barnes asked, can you comment on the work of Michael O'Brien? I don't know. I didn't know anything about him. He says he's a Canadian Roman Catholic artist and novelist and student of William Kurelic. I'm specifically wondering what you think of a Christian artist's role as a prophet and as a prophet of the end times, a central theme in O'Brien's novels. Thank you for everything you're doing with the Symbolic World. I think that Christian artists can play the role of a prophet, and I think sometimes you'll be surprised to find that non-Christians will act as prophets. If you mean prophets, depends what you mean by prophet. Like if you mean a prophet as someone who kind of taps into the patterns and is somehow able to describe things in a way which is perceiving how the patterns are playing themselves out, in the world today. Sometimes you get prophecies from the strangest and most random places that, you hear a song on the radio and you realize that you're listening to prophecy. So, but I do think that Christians can play that role. I think that often they don't, and I think that often they do it in a very lousy manner. But I can't talk about the specific person's writings, but I'm giving you the worst case scenario. Like let's take the Left Behind series, which was like, prophecy of the end times. It just absolute crap. Like nothing, no insight on anything really. Just not very interesting at all. So I have to check him out and see if what he's doing is any good. All right, so Benjamin Wood asks, is there significance to Eve not conceiving until after the initial fall? Is there a place for procreation in the heavenly city of the eschaton? Whoa, that's an interesting question. There's definitely significance in Eve not conceiving until after the initial fall, because conception and sexual reproduction is a consequence of the fall. And a lot of people today somehow want to deny that because they think it's like people can't hold complex thoughts. You can say that there's nothing wrong with sexuality, that sexuality is a good, and also understand that it is still a consequence of the fall, that it is also the process of death playing itself out, because you read in the fathers about the idea that the human nature was broken into individuals, that that human nature was separated into a multitude of persons, and then that is the fall. It's like this break and this fragmentation, and so that's most of the fathers that I read seem to explain it that way. Some even go further than that. Some say that even the separation of Adam into two people, that Adam was separated into Adam and Eve, that was already in vision of the fall, and it's not silly to think that because Adam is put to sleep in order to create Eve. And so sleep is really an image of death in all of tradition. And so there's this like little death that God puts on Adam, out of which he separates Adam into two people. And so you can understand that now there's something about that, this duality, which seems to already be anticipating this fall into duality, which is going to come later. Of course, the creation of Eve is not a fall, of course not, but it's like you can see the process. It's like the question is, how much fragmentation can you handle? How much duality can you handle until it splits? And for sure, for sure. And you read in Scripture, it really just says that there's the fall, and then it says Adam knew his wife. It's like, okay, well, there's a reason why it says that right after the fall, and that conception and birth happens afterwards. So yeah. And is there a place for procreation in the heavenly city of the eschaton? I would probably say no. I'd probably say no. But that's really, I don't know if I've ever read anything about that, but I would probably say no. So John Barnes asks, all right, I already said that. Okay, so Drew McMahon asks, is it possible to have standards for yourself and those around you without judgment? Jesus teaches that only he can judge, but I find that the more that I confirm my Christian identity beliefs, the more I feel myself judging others. How do we avoid this? Well, there's really just one way to avoid it, is to constantly be looking back at yourself and to constantly be asking yourself, the thing that's interesting is that usually, not always, but often the sins that we notice in others are sins that we have a sensitivity to ourselves. That's why we notice them. And so the idea would be that when you notice something in someone else, the best way to do it is that just let your eye turn right back at you and try to notice why you're noticing this sin in these other people. Is it because you're tempted by it? Is it because you're disgusted by it? And if you're disgusted by it, what makes you disgusted by other people's sins? And so it's like, I would say to be able to do that, but it should be absolutely possible to have a high moral standard and at the same time care for those who don't adhere to that standard. We do it all the time. And so I think that that's what you should strive for. Yeah. But there is something, the problem that we're facing a narrative, which is the idea that if you disagree with someone, that means that if you disagree with someone's position or someone's lifestyle, you somehow are judging their entire person. That if you think that, like, let's say that I think it's funny because a lot of it now has to do with homosexuality. It's like that seems to be the big question, because Christians think that it's a sin, that somehow that it means that we're judging the entire person and that you hate the person because of that. It's like, I have people around me. I have plenty of people around me who are not married and living together and have children. And I think that that ultimately that's how you should do it. You should be married. You should have a promise to the person you're with, and that's in that context that you should have children. And so I see the opposite around me, but it just, I hold that standard, but it doesn't mean that I judge them, and it doesn't mean that I hate them, or that they're just there, and I can still be in relationships with them. And so to me, it's like I don't think it's I don't know. I just don't think it's that big of a deal. Yeah. All right. But I understand the struggle, just because there's such a weird polemic today, which is difficult to break from. All right. So Taylor Wilson asks, "Hello, Mr. Peugeot. Thank you so much for your work. I was a bit confused about your concept of a person. What do you mean by a person, and what makes a person a person? It seems to me that if you make any one thing which is not a religious presupposition the deciding factor of what makes a person, you will inevitably create a greater or lesser class of people, such as racial superiority. The thing that the rationalist types haven't yet realized is that the concept of a person, not a human in the biological sense, but the sense of being made in the image of God." See, now, I think that that's the problem. I think that this is the problem. I think this is maybe the issue, is like, there's no place where it says that a person is created in the image of God. I don't know where you saw that. A man is created in the image of God. And so a person is an actual incarnation of human nature. It's an actual human. It's a human in the world, right? So it's not. And so the idea in the Christian understanding is a person. The word person comes from the notion of hypostasis. That is, it's a particular thing. So there's a hypostasis of a microphone. There's a hypostasis of every essence has different manifestations. So you have book, you have the notion of a book, and then you have books. Books are hypostases of a book. Now, we use the word person in a very specific sense today, in a kind of moral sense, and all of that, and that's fine. But we need to understand that the person is an instantiation of man, is a child of Adam. That's what makes a person a person. A person is being an instantiation of human nature, right? Okay, so that's important. But if you also don't understand that there's an analogy between that and the notion of hypostases, then you will never understand what it means. When we say that God is three persons, what we're talking about, because God is not a man. God is not a man. I mean, Christ incarnated into and divinized human nature, but God the Father is not a man, right? The divine essence and the human nature are not the same. So it's just it's just really a different way to understand things. I don't know. All right. Okay. So sorry, man. So he says that the thing that rational types haven't yet realized is that the concept of a person, not a human in the biological sense, but in the sense of being made in the image of God, is completely irrational from the scientific perspective. People are different across every discernible dimension. So that's it. There's a human nature, and there are instantiations of that nature. There are actual humans, and that's it. Like, that's what a person is in the sense of a human person. That's what a person is. So I don't know. That's yeah. I hope that makes sense. It's just a different way of thinking. And I know people aren't used to thinking that way, but if you're able to start thinking that way, it's going to solve a lot of problems for you, because yeah. All right. Okay. So Norm Grondin asks, Yuval Noah Harari wrote, "Humanism is the belief that all knowledge comes from the self, based upon how we feel, rather than from the sky, from the divine. What do you think of the humanism idea that we as humans are to create our own meaning?" I think it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't mean anything. It's like the belief that all knowledge comes from the self, based on how we feel, rather than from the sky, from the divine. That's, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that person means. It's absolute nonsense. The fact that drinking water makes you live, that's meaning. That doesn't come from the self. It doesn't come from your feelings. The fact that if something is too low in your house, you're going to bump your head against it. That doesn't come from the self, right? And that's also part of understanding meaning. And there's such a problem with that type of thinking. There's such a problem because where does that come from? Where do what we feel come from? Like, where does the self, what the self is, this supremely unique thing in the entire universe? And so it's like there's all this stuff, and then there's the self, and there's no relationship between all this stuff and the self. There's no relationship between, I don't know. There's just to me, humanism doesn't make a lot of sense at all. You can't create your own meaning. It just doesn't work. I mean, you can try, or you can pretend that you're doing it. But there are certain natural hierarchies in the world which are just functional. And if you try to create your own meaning, at some point you're going to start bumping up against reality. And when I mean reality, I just don't mean just mean the physical reality, but just the pattern reality of the world. You're just going to start bumping up against it, and it's not going to work. And you see that in a lot of ideological thinking, and I see it in a lot of weird kind of utopian ideas where they don't, because they don't understand the patterns, they think that they can just design something and create their own meaning, but because they don't understand the actual meaning in the universe and the actual patterns, they can't see the unforeseen consequences of their actions. And then they're surprised when it comes and kicks them in the ass. They're surprised that when it happens. It's like, it's the same problem with like Steven Pinker, who just wants to take everything he doesn't like about the modern world and call it the counter enlightenment, as if they're not manifestations of the same process and the same thinking that creates the things he likes about the modern world. It's just, it doesn't work that way. It's going to come back and kick you if you don't take it into account. All right. Okay. So Elisa Brugman asks, I've been thinking about your discussion about Frankenstein and Golems in one of the previous videos. And it occurred to me that those types of monsters are men trying to procreate on their own. Perhaps it's a warning that procreation that is not the result of the union of the two sexes creates the monster. The resulting offspring can be fully formed or have a soul if it's not the consequence of... The resulting offspring can't be fully formed or have a soul if it's not the consequence of the joining of man and woman. I'm on the right track with that. Thank you so much for your discussions. You can understand it that way to a certain extent, in the sense of this idea of creating an artificial being. There's definitely something about that, especially Frankenstein and the Golem. And you can understand it in what I was just talking about before, right? What I was just talking about before, the idea that you think that you can completely impose your will upon nature in the sense of of creation, and that you can create something which is going to be an image of you and is going to be fully that is going to fully respond in the way that you think it's going to respond, and that pride, the pride that you think you can do that, means that you are lacking the insight to see how reality actually works. And so that thing you're going to create is going to have a backlash to it. It's going to have a side effect to it that you're not going to know until you enact it, and then it's going to come back. And you see that, especially in the golem, you see that, of course. But I think that that's the people who are thinking about AI should really read the golem, because that's what happened with the golem, and it's going to happen with AI. It's just the AI is going to be all over the world. It's not just going to be in Prague. All right. So Julia P asks, will you explain what happened in the 11th or 12th century, and why was it pivotal moment in Western thinking? Yeah, I mentioned that in the last Q&A. Thanks, Lisa. She added a comment. I think probably be better to go there and check it out, just because I still have a lot of questions to answer. And so I think I'm just going to keep going with that one. So check out the comment, last Q&A at minute 58:13, to see me talk about the 11th, 12th century and what happened there. So Lisa Parrott asks, what's the symbolism of tattoos? Is it related to graffiti? Throwback to all the graffiti in the Joker movie. I guess it's a form of ornamentation, tries to fix an identity. Yeah. Well, why do we generally associate tattoos with rebellion, irrespective of the explicit message of the tattoo? It's also interesting to me that they're quite permanent, and yet people sometimes get addicted to getting new ones. It reminds you of how social media works, in the sense that we're always chasing novelty while simultaneously building up a permanent record of who we are and want to be. Yeah, I think your insight is dead on right there. I think that your insight about graffiti is very good. I think your insight about social media is also very good, in the sense of of creating these additions to your identity, these extensions of your identity, which are not fully thought out and are somehow manifest. The tattoos often end up manifesting some demon, like, or some passion, or something about that person that they have to exteriorize. The people have these weird, like, really strong desires to get a tattoo of some random thing, and so that's kind of how I feel. It's kind of like a celebration of the accidental and the random, and in a way that has to do with graffiti. And so in that sense, that's why it's related to rebellion as well. This idea of kind of self-expression, the ultimate version of self-expression, you could say, is graffiti and the tattoo. And it's such a caricature that you can end up seeing how kind of silly it is, and how it actually lacks profundity. Like, I don't have any problems with tattoos. It's like, I think it's fine if you want to get a tattoo. There are some tattoos, for example, like the idea of Coptic Christians who gets tattooed crosses on themselves in order to remember their Christianity. I think, there are useful possibilities for tattoos, but I think a lot of modern tattoos have to do with this weird excess of ornamentation that you mentioned, and also a kind of reign of the arbitrary, kind of latching onto the arbitrary. So Laura Gilles asked, you have said in your recent video discussion with Benjamin Boyce, which I love, that the modern world is too masculine. Isn't the US and other Protestant-based cultures more likely to be that way because of the fact that they don't honor the place and example of the Theotokos, of Mary? I think it's true. I think that for sure. I think that there's a relationship between the putting aside of the reverence to Mary in the West, and the rise of extreme rationalism and kind of scientific culture, or scientism. I think there's definitely a relationship in that. It's as if in the desire to deny the body that received the logos, it's like they didn't have a way to compensate that with something else. And so, yeah, I think that for sure. And this idea also that the earth became just a kind of storehouse for things, and didn't have a sacred aspect to it or something that we needed to be careful of and be respectful of, I think is also there. And so in this idea of abusing ecology or stripping resources and all this type of stuff has to do with a hyper masculine aspect of the world. So what does Christ mean when he says, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven? I mean, I think that sentence has many, many meanings. It's a very profound one. One of the ways that maybe I can relate you to this, based on my recent video on hierarchy and inversion and everything, is the idea that the child is a completely dependent on their parents. And I think that that's what that means, is that when we talk about freedom, we have this strange idea of freedom. We have the idea that we kind of become our own self-contained thing, that we are, just self-sufficient. But that is definitely not the Christian way of understanding things. Like, yes, you have to be responsible. Yes, you have to free yourselves from your passions. Yes, you have to do all those things, but you have to do it as you are fully submitting yourself to that which is above you. And so that is what it means to become like a child, in the sense that you are completely dependent, completely submitted, and when he says a child, it's really a babe, like a little baby that can't do anything without their parents. And so, and I know that this is going to sound weird for people, but that's, in a way, that is ultimately how we're supposed to live, that we become responsible for that which is below us, that we it doesn't mean that we're passive or that we don't engage with the world, but it means that as to the things which are above us, we are completely given to those. And then as to the things which are below us, which are in our kingdom to rule or to engage with, then those things we have to be fully engaged with, in terms of being responsible, in terms of being active, in terms of doing the things we need to do. So to me, that's what I think. It's one of the things that I think Christ is talking about in terms of to be like children. And there's also has to do with being small. There's a lot of symbolism that Christ used in terms of this idea of becoming small. This idea of the seed, the seed that is small, the smallest seed of all, that gives the biggest tree. And this idea of becoming small in the sense of also removing all your externals, all the things that you've accumulated, to kind of remove them, to strip them as you enter into the essence of what you are. Like, as you enter into your heart, as you enter into that. And I think that that's also one of the things that Christ is referring to when he talks about becoming like a child. So Benjamin Wood asks, one of the most interesting bits I got from Ogi Ogas's talk on the book A Billion Wicked Thoughts, which attempts to survey the patterns in viewing pornography, is the popularity of transgender porn among straight male viewers. In a conversation with Peterson, you discussed the desirability of the monstrous things that merge or defy categories, and its relation to JBP's point about monkeys fixating on a snake. Is the fixation of the trans issue, whether in abstract political notions or sexual fetishization, a manifestation of this? What does a healthy relationship to the monstrous look like? Yeah, I think it definitely is a manifestation of this. You guys forced me to talk about stuff that's going to get me in trouble. Seriously. The idea that the monstrous or the undefined can be a source of seduction, because it's undefined. It's asking to be, it's luring you in by the question, by the mystery, by the strangeness, by the surprise, by the unknown, right? And so it's not surprising that people, as they get into the world of pornography, where it's like it is entering into that world of increase of stimulation, increase of curiosity, increase of possibility that at some point they're going to go in that direction, because it's the ultimate place where all the categories merge and all the strangeness manifests itself. There's actually an interesting essay that Jean Baudrillard wrote about that, where he talks about the I think he was talking more about the crossdresser in his text, but it still fits in the sense that there's a sense where it's pure desire. It becomes pure desire because the whole aspect of the whole aspect of procreation is completely gone. It becomes only about sexuality, right? It's like it can only be about that, and it joins the two aspects together into one figure to gaze upon. And so the fact that it kind of confuses and merges all these things, which is what desire does already, and the fact that that there's no life there, there's no joining of masculine and feminine in a here's the way to understand it. It's the opposite of joining of masculine and feminine. It's the confusion of masculine and feminine. And so it's like the opposite of an actual relationship. So that character is the mere reflection of the other. And so it's normal that as you go down into that dark place, that is what you're going to end up at some point becoming, at least in your fantasies, it's what's going to kind of inhabit your fantasies. I'm not that surprised to know that, and so what does a healthy relationship to the monsters look like? Most monsters just have to be left alone. That's usually the most healthy relationship to a monster, is to just leave it and to not deal with it, to just leave it in the margin, as long as it stays in the margin, to just not. All right, that's as good as I'm going to get on that, guys. So now I'm not surprised. I'm going to see all these things in the chat that are being held because of this subject, guys. I probably should have skipped that question. All right. Okay, here we go. All right. So Father Scott Murray, do the Orthodox allow cremation? Any thoughts on the symbolism of a funeral in the presence of ashes versus a funeral in the presence of the body? Have a blessed Christmas and Epiphany. To my understanding, Orthodox do not allow cremation. I'm sure that it has happened in the most extreme cases, but I think that the Orthodox always encourage burial. And I mean, the symbolism of death and burial is difficult to fully understand, in the sense of why would it be important to bury the body. I think it's important in terms of symbolism and our participation in symbolism. This idea of to see the body and to see the body go into the earth. I think there's something about all of that which is happening, which is extremely important in terms of us participating in death. That's as good as it's going to get. Barry Cavett asked, what is the symbolism of the two witnesses in Revelations? Dude, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't want to go into Revelations. That's tough stuff. I mean, traditionally, the two witnesses have been understood to be Enoch and Elijah, the two that were taken up. I've seen that in I forget which text that I saw, which interpretation I saw that in. Yeah, sorry, man, I'm not going to go far on that one. Right, so Simon Laberge asks in French, bonsoir, mon collègue de catéchisme Julien Sandiford se posait cette question. So he says his colleague in catechism was asking himself this question: what is the meaning of the wheels within wheels in Ezekiel's vision, and more specifically of the eyes surrounding the wheels? Merci à l'avance. And so the way that I understand the wheels within the wheels is really he's seeing a pattern of reality. He's really seeing he's really seeing this fractal structure that I'm talking about. So it's like a wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, right? So it's the same structure as it gets bigger. That's the way I see it. And I think the idea that they're covered in eyes, it means that they're patterns of knowledge, they're patterns of consciousness, you could say today, that they're patterns that know the world and that are to be known, right? They're the element of knowing in the world. So they're the structures of reality. That, to me, that's the best way of understanding it. So Robert Smith asks, the recent gospel was the axe at the root of the tree. Looking to St. Ephrem, what are your thoughts on the liturgy being symbolic of cutting down trees which hide the tree of life? After all, we begin with confession, absolution, which undoes the thorns, then the reading of the true word, which undoes the fig leaves, which are symbolic for the words of the world. Finally, communion in an undoing of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as Christ is not only the new Adam, but the new apple, as it were. I agree with you to a certain extent, and I think it's okay to see it that way. I think it's always okay to see this moving into the center as a removal of the garments of skin, as a cutting off of the outside and moving in towards the trunk of the tree, you could say. But you have to understand that once you get to the middle, once you get to the tree of life, then everything else comes with it. It's never fully a denial. So there's a denial of let's say the thorns and the fig leaf and all of this and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But if you read St. Ephrem, he says that the way that God wanted for Adam and Eve was to eat the tree of life and then eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the sense that that which is above contains that which is below ultimately. And so that's why Christ wears a crown of thorns. I've talked about that a million times before. And so yes, but at the same time, everything is gathered into communion, right? And that's why communion is, like I've talked about again before, that's why communion isn't just the apple, right? Communion also contains the scandal in it, right? It is the eating of flesh and blood. It contains the scandal within its transcending of all of it. And so it has everything inside of it. All right. Okay, so there you go. We got through all the questions. And so now I'm going to go into the super chats. All right, let's see this. These Q&As are becoming really long, guys. I have to find some kind of a solution to that, because I'm not that used to. All right, there aren't so many. All right, so Virginia Charlotte asks, can men on the MGTOW, how do you refer that? MGTOW, MGTOW path create enough feminine space to adequately frame and nurture their masculine quest needs? Who will care for an aging solitary man's needs when he can no longer do it alone? I don't think I've ever talked about this whole thing in the world. To be honest, I don't know a lot about it. I think that I don't know what people's. I mean, I can understand the motivations of people who go down that path. I would say that for men who want to go down that path, the best way to go, the true way to go down that path for it to have some kind of positive effect on you would be to become a monk, dude. To do it, go all out, like go become a monk, live an ascetic lifestyle. If you want your, let's say, suffering to become something more. But if someone does kind of decides to go down that path out of bitterness and remains bitter, and then lives a life of solitary masturbation for the rest of their life, and watching porn and saying that they want nothing to do with women, it's like I don't see how that is going to help you become a better person. I mean, like I said, I can understand how crazy the world has become and how nuts some of the things that I've seen. I know guys who have been absolutely demolished by, crazy women who had their children, and that completely destroyed them. And it's like, man, that's some tough stuff, and the legal system is on their side and everything is against you. I can totally understand that. But still, I have to say that I think that for our own salvation, I would say that, yeah, I would say it's like either become a monk and go all out and use that suffering for transcendence, or you have to somehow reconcile yourself with that, and then not not live in bitterness. But I don't know. Each person is different, and maybe I'm putting intentions in people that are not there. Maybe men are able to live without bitterness and to go on their own and to live solitary lives. I think that's probably totally possible. But anyways, I'd become a monk. That's what I'd do. But it's not gonna happen. I mean, my wife is great and my kids are great and my family's wonderful. One of the things too is like, I hate to say this to you guys, but depends where you also find the women that you guys are marrying. If you meet a girl in a bar that has, look, go to church. You go to church. How many times I have to tell you guys? If you want to find a woman, go to church. It's the best place to find a woman. All right. And it's not 100%, just like guys in church are not 100% either, but the average possibility of finding someone who will want to live and put the effort in and live will at least get higher if you go to church. All right. Sorry. I don't want to make it sound like I have no sympathy here. Okay. So Pat Chara says, upside down pyramids fall sideways. How can we tell if an inverted hierarchy reverts properly? How can we tell if an inverted hierarchy reverts properly? I mean, the way you can tell is that it just becomes a normal hierarchy. A normal hierarchy has qualities. You can recognize them. They whatever the hierarchy is for, in terms, it can be any type of hierarchy. It can be, like, it could be a spiritual hierarchy. It can be a hierarchy of the best plumber, or the hierarchy of whatever, or a hierarchy in a business or whatever. The way that that a hierarchy is working properly is that the people that are atop the hierarchy are serving the purpose of the hierarchy, and that the people that are below the hierarchy are given ways to engage with the hierarchy in a manner which is appropriate to their level at each level of the hierarchy, and that there is also a manner in which you can recognize what is inside and what is outside, and what is in the buffer zone, you could say. I guess that would be the way to tell, I think. All right. All right. Okay. Okay. So Vapor Trails asks, don't want you to betray any confidence, but have you talked to JBP lately? How's he doing? And do you ever discuss matters of faith with him? I got a message from him yesterday, and he's still not doing great. He's still struggling. I think he's back in Toronto, but to be honest, I haven't had a lot of contact with him for the past year. Just small notes, small emails. Like, he still writes me little notes, and I'll still write him little notes, but we haven't had any long discussion. I just finished a carving for him, which I'm going to hopefully deliver to him in January, and I'm hoping it'll be a chance for me to actually talk to him. Just because, like I said, I haven't talked to him forever. I haven't actually had a conversation with him for more than like a year, more than a year. Yeah, more than a year. All right. So Baron Von Blair says for $5, thank you for being part of my edification. My pleasure. Michael Griffin, $50 and no questions. Dude, thank you. That's awesome. Jonathan Ott says for $5, in what capacity do the 12 apostles judge the 12 tribes of Israel? Where do they judge the 12 tribes of Israel? I think a way to understand the 12 apostles in relationship to the 12 tribes of Israel is to understand them as being the, you know, the entering into the individual, right? The entering into the persons. And that's what also Christ does. It's like you can see God kind of manifesting himself, descending the hierarchy in one of those steps in order to encounter us. One of those steps is the nation, and then it comes down to the personal, and then that's the incarnation of Christ, and then the disciples become like Israel in the personal realm, and they become principalities. I don't know about judging the 12 tribes of Israel, but this idea that they will judge the world with Christ is really important to understand, in the sense that Christ has his body, right? And so it's like the disciples will judge the world with Christ, and then ultimately you can understand it. You can understand it as the whole body of Christ will judge the world with Christ. In a different levels, you could say it like that. Okay, so Jonathan Ott for $5. And modern conspiracy theories aside, do you think Scripture says that there will be a physical third temple? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think Scripture says that. You mean that the vision of Ezekiel? And I think that's like really an eschatological description in Ezekiel, I think. So Nick Sherman for $5 asks thoughts regarding QAnon. Dude, I haven't really looked into QAnon enough to answer these questions. Narratives like the canary in the coal mine, secret leader sending codes to save the republic, white hat scenario. I mean, I think I've answered about QAnon. I haven't really followed it very much. What I've seen of QAnon is that it seems to be hit and miss, and it seems to be someone using obscure languages for reasons not quite clear why, kind of like Nostradamus. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't really followed it. Mahasattva asked, what do you know about Freemasonry and what do you think about it? I mean, what do I know about Freemasonry? Man, you guys asking these questions. I think Freemasonry seems to have genuine, interesting roots. Seems to. Some of the symbolism that I've seen of Freemasonry seems to be interesting. And I'm not talking about like the conspiracy version, like the Leo Texil idea that they worship Baphomet or whatever. When you actually look at their traditions, there's some interesting things there. But like I've said in other videos, I think that what's happened with Freemasonry, it seems that it's true that according to their tradition, they come from this line of builders and this line of cathedral builders, that have some understanding of patterns in terms of architecture and how those analogies refer to the actual shape of the cosmos. There seems to be some interesting things there, but what seems to have happened is that it seems to have become a place of subversion, and if you look at a lot of the subversive movements in the modern world, they seem to be related to Freemasonry, and some of it has to do with also a weird thing in Protestantism, like that somehow got connected to Protestantism, and that there was also a connection with Jacques de Molay and the Templars, and this idea that there had to be a revenge against the Catholic Church. Like all of that seems to be in there, and so I think there are reasons why the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and the traditional churches have condemned Freemasonry, because they saw that there's a relationship between They could see that the Freemasons were involved in the revolutionary movements, that the Freemasons were involved in a lot of the things that were going on. Now, it doesn't mean that all of their symbolism is necessarily bunk. Just like I think that Protestantism is problematic, but I don't think that all of their symbolism is bunk neither. And I think that I'm not a fan of Hinduism, and I'm a Christian, but I can look at Hinduism and find some interesting things in Hinduism as well. And so there are some there's some interesting aspects in Freemasonry about the idea of the cut stone and the uncut stone. And so you can see the two sides, the right hand and the left hand. So anyway, there's some interesting stuff, but I haven't felt the need to look at it very much because I'm a Christian and I'm an Orthodox Christian, and the Orthodox Church doesn't allow you to be a Freemason. And so to me, that's enough. Like, I don't feel the need to really dive into it and find out about it and know all its symbolism. The times where I have met some Freemasons and they've kind of explained some of it to me, some of it seemed interesting, but yeah, that's all I can say. So the dude online for $5 asked me, are MMOs an example of an attempting to recreate communal participatory ritual that we lack in modern culture? I don't know what's an MMO. I don't even know what that is. Oh, what is it? Oh, massively multiplayer online games. Okay, that's what it is. It shows you guys how not a gamer I am. No, I think you're right. I totally agree. I think there are examples. They're an attempt to do that. And I'm not saying they can't play a role in sparking something in someone, a kind of desire to live out adventure, like any of these types of peripheral things. I think that they can maybe act as a way to wake someone up and want them. And I can see it, like you can see it in Gamergate. You can see in Gamergate, there's some interesting things that have come out of it in terms of people thinking for themselves and people trying to explore different, it's like Sargon of Akkad came out of Gamergate. Like, I don't agree with everything Sargon of Akkad says, but I mean, he's obviously at least trying to think about things and he's trying to kind of figure things out. And so, it's possible that it could be a gateway to help to people wanting to engage in the world, but it can also do the opposite. That is for sure. I think people can get lost in those things, and it can be a way to escape your life. So, all right, let me just refresh this, and then I think we're going to be done, guys, because, all right, so I've got two more, and then that's it. So I'm going to do two more, and then we're done. So Panokosteros for $5 says, hi, Jonathan. Hope you and your family have a blessed nativity. Also, can you give us an update on Matthew's new book on Prophet David? So I don't know. I'm going to see Matthew during the holiday season. He doesn't have a phone now. He doesn't have the internet. And so I have no way of contacting him, barely. Once in a while, he'll write a message. I think he's like borrowing someone's phone or whatever. So I don't know. So I'll ask him when I see him in around the holidays. All right. So Lessons for Life, £2 says, recently visited Syria and saw a lot of monasteries. All right. Well, it's good to know. Thanks, guys. All right. So I want to say thank you to everybody for coming in. And I don't know who ended up moderating. I hope someone was moderating, because with all those questions about Freemasonry and stuff, it must have been crazy in the chat, guys. And hopefully everything is going to be okay. So yeah. So guys, thank you for your time, and I will see all of you next month. All right. Bye-bye, guys.